Welcome to the Tech Simple podcast. Independent insights into the latest AV technologies, as well as tips and best practices to optimize AV solutions for modern workplace and learning environments. Here are your hosts, David and Jonathan from Konnectus AV Consulting.
Welcome to another episode of the Tech Simple podcast. As always, I'm Jonathan Cuthbertson, and joining me is my good friend and colleague, David Allara. Welcome, David.
Hey, Jono, how are you? It's good to catch up again for one of these episodes. You've been well?
I am trying to survive this cold weather in Melbourne, but I'll persevere. It's not too different to the mountains, but I don't know, it hits differently somehow. But enough about that. I'm pretty keen to get into today's topic, actually. I've known our guest for quite some time, and he's been in different roles and in different areas in our industry. Who are we talking to today?
Well, that's right. We've got a very experienced guest today from the AV industry. Very well-rounded is how I would describe Pujan Doshi-Dowsett. So he is currently working at IAG. He's a product owner there for meeting spaces and VC tech. Has been in that role about 6 months. But I think, there's lots of experience from other roles that he's previously been at. He's been at Amicus Interiors for almost 3 years, Macquarie University for another 2 years there. So exposure to, mid-sized business, a very large organisation in the university, and also some smaller businesses as well. Business Blueprint is one of those, which I'm very passionate about, and we're going to talk about in a little bit of detail later on. So I guess, Pujan, welcome. It's great to have you on the show, and I think today what we'd love to address is quite a few different topics. But now that you're client side again, I think it'd be really great to get a feel for what does a client really need when it comes to audiovisual technology, and how do we extract those needs and address them, and sort of cut through a lot of maybe selling that's out there from different manufacturers or different suppliers saying, oh, you must have this or you must have that. I think what's really important for the listeners of this particular episode is to sort of understand from client side perspective, how do we get to the truth, how do we get to the real needs, and just providing some advice and recommendations along those lines, which could be really helpful. Because it's not always easy especially in this modern day, when you're kind of bombarded with so many options from different suppliers and manufacturers. So, welcome, Pujan.
Thanks, David. Jonathan, thanks for having me. Great to be here. This is going to be the shortest episode ever, because to answer your question, it's stop selling buzzwords, start designing actual solutions. End of episode.
There we go. That's it. Okay. Short one. 3 minutes. Done.
Great to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's actually a great point. I mean, do you feel like that's where we are, or have been for a long time? You've got so much experience. Do you feel like that's what you see time and time again from the manufacturers or suppliers, that maybe what they're saying they have or can supply is not reality? Is that what you're insinuating?
To a point, it's, I guess, taking a step back, broadly speaking, for me, there's two design philosophies that you use when you're approaching AV system design. And you can plot these two philosophies at either end of a line. At one end, you have an ethos where you're designing for a best-in-class experience. So all the cutting-edge solutions that vendors are coming out with that promise more equitable, immersive meetings, all those buzzwords that we use in the industry, and that's at one end. On the other end is a more conservative, sort of standards-based, supportable, scalable solution where you build a room type and deploy that in mass across a whole wide range of rooms in the organization. Mm-hmm. Every organization and every consultant sort of needs to ask themselves a whole bunch of questions to figure out where on that line between those two extremes they need to place themselves. Mm. I mean, the questions you've got to ask yourselves are things like, how critical is video conferencing actually to your core business activities? What's your utilization like? How wedded are you to your current conferencing provider? what's the future state of hybrid working at your organization? What's your brand identity and business culture? Is it aligned to innovation? Is it aligned to risk aversion? How spread out to your user base? What change management levers can you pull to train users on new systems? How much input do you get to architectural design? How mature is your operational process? How big is your support team? Any vendors, consultants, integrators, engineers that are listening to this call, do yourself a favor when you're working with a client and do a profile of that client with those questions. Figure out where they are on the line, and then approach your design methodology from that standpoint. Because until then, you're throwing around buzzwords around equitable, simple, stable meetings, and they're all just buzzwords if you're not actually designing from that ethos.
That is such a great sort of series of points. So I think, the old trip up that sometimes you see where people jump into solution mode without doing their homework, so to speak.
Mm.
And I think that's what you're getting to there.
And we've all been guilty of it.
Now, when we talk about doing your homework, that's not always easy. It actually takes effort.
Mm.
So, whether you're client side or an external party, a supplier, you do have to do those hard yards. As I say, peel back the onion, peel back the layers, get down to the truth, find out who the true decision makers and the stakeholders are, and understand true needs. And that's what I love to hear from you and your experience from a client side perspective. Now you're at a large organization in IAG, and you've also worked at Macquarie University. But you also would have served clients who are large as well. What are some of the, approaches that you have to try and get to the right stakeholders and uncover their true needs? I mean, you talk about stakeholders; they probably come into a number of different categories. You've got, the end user groups who actually use the tech day to day. You might have the executive level decision makers who are sort of opening the purse and paying the money. And then you've definitely got the support teams, operation and IT, tech support, for example. And they would all have different viewpoints. And I suppose you've got to try and uncover from them what's important to them, and then somehow prioritize and navigate towards a better future for all. So that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. Are you able to talk to that and provide a bit of insight as to how you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, they're almost competing. Those three sort of groups that you mentioned, end users, executive leadership, and operational support, they almost have competing interests, right? Like if you asked your IT support team what the perfect end state would be, it would be a range of solutions or a single solution deployed across every single room that has the exact same hardware spec made by the exact same manufacturer that also produces the software. So you have just a single vendor to approach when things go awry. If you speak with end users, there's a custom need in every single space. And multiple connection points and things that just aren't necessarily supportable or scalable. And if you speak with your executive team, it's around alignment with the rest of the business, alignment with contracts and enterprise agreements with your Microsofts or Googles or Zoom or whatever platform of choice that you're using. It's also alignment with property standards and future direction of hybrid working at that business and keeping costs down to a minimum. Your job in a way, or my job in a way, is finding a balance point between those three sort of different requirement sets and figuring out a solution that caters adequately to those end user requirements and also the property limitations of a specific space, so that the tech is functional, works, is easy to use without breaking the bank, with strategic alignment, and with a level of supportability for our operational team to actually maintain into the 4 or 6 year life cycle of that kit until it's due for refresh and replacement. How you actually go about collecting those requirements is a whole nother kettle of fish.
Yep.
Particularly at a large organization where you can't necessarily just walk up to the 150 or 200 people that work there and have a quick conversation and understand how they operate, right? Like there's complexity there, and that brings about sort of certain challenges in terms of gathering exactly what people need to be able to collaborate using the audiovisual technologies and have the audiovisual technology support business function. If you're just gonna rely on tickets, you're gonna have a really bad time, because support tickets that users submit are, for one, they're pretty limited reflection of the performance of the tech, because they're only telling you when things go wrong, and from a second standpoint, users walk into a meeting room, their meeting starting in 30 seconds, boss is waiting on the other end, they tap the touch panel, it doesn't wake up. 6 other people in the room, all eyes on them, going, "Come on, we need to get this meeting started. What's going on?" The last thing they're thinking of is submitting a ticket, even if you make it easy by putting a QR code in the room. They just want to find a space or a way to have that meeting that works and rant about it later to their colleagues about how terrible the tech experience at the company is. We need to find a better way of connecting with those users, because we don't often hear about those things unless it gets escalated up to a level of executive management that sort of wants to hold people accountable regarding those negative experiences. So we need to find better ways of connecting with users to find out what works, what doesn't work, and what needs aren't currently being met. I'm sure this is something that you guys have come across as well.
Oh, 100%. It is a tough one. And, I think if you're able to get access to end users in stakeholder group sessions, we found that to be highly useful. It's not always possible, because it is an investment in time on behalf of the end customer, and they need to, I suppose, almost buy into the benefit of doing this. Because at the end of the day, Pujan and Jonathan, I'd like to ask you, if we look at this, like if we break it down into 3 components, when we're, I suppose, putting systems and designs together, you've got your needs assessment, you've got the technology and designs themselves, and then you've got the support element, and they're all interconnected, I believe. I think if you've done a good job, you'll have all 3 of those intersecting, and you'll be able to get the right technology for that particular customer, which is adding actual value to their business or organization. Do you think the needs assessment component, which is what we're talking about now, is maybe the most important?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the bedrock. It's definitely the first thing that you should be doing, is gathering actual requirements on the ground for the people that'll be using the systems, and using the systems to do their jobs better, basically. Be more collaborative, be more productive. Everything else is a flow-on effect of how do you deliver to that with these other caveats in mind, but the core has to be that end user piece. And you mentioned a good point about user groups and stakeholder management, stakeholder sessions that happen as part of projects, and that's a good point at which to capture those requirements, but it still feels reactive doing that. It feels like you're sort of responding on a project by project basis to changing needs. And where we need to get to is, the ideal state really is being able to have ongoing, living, breathing channels of connection with the user group that can inform a broader product roadmap and strategy over a 3 to 5 year period. So that every time a project comes up, we're just discussing implementation of that existing roadmap, as opposed to building from the ground up every single time. Particularly, I find that more important than anywhere else at large organizations with a variety of business functions that are spread across a geographically diverse area, like the organization I'm currently working at. There's a million projects happening at once with competing user requirements. And if you're trying to reinvent the wheel every single time based on the user groups of each individual project, you're going to need 10 of you just to keep up with the workload.
Yeah.
Quite an interesting point. I think you're absolutely right. There is a need to be able to actively and proactively capture data to be able to assess how systems are being used. Because I quite often find if you are trying to do some needs assessment and understand what a particular user group's requirements are, quite often they don't really know or are able to articulate those requirements effectively. It's quite powerful to be able to provide them with scenario-based needs or scenarios on how to use systems, and they can quite effectively provide feedback on there. But how do you actually create those scenarios? And I think this is what you're alluding to. We need to be able to collect that information before going to them so that we can actually give them an example or give them a scenario-based and say, hey, I found that your user group is using the systems in this way. Why is that? Is that because of X, Y, and Z or not? So using data to analyze existing systems, I think is definitely a way that we could go down and achieve that. But it's quite interesting. You also pointed out at the very start of this conversation, you've got that spectrum with the 2 points, best in class kind of system and, the standardization. In a large organization, like you were saying, you're working with at the moment, there's very diverse needs. So I think understanding where different user groups fit on that line is very important to the conversation as well. Because do you do something that's very different and out of the box because this particular user group has creative needs, or are they a kind of a very core function of the business and their requirements are, I just need to go into a space and present my content from my Excel. So having an understanding of where on that line each user group falls or business unit falls is key to be able to be providing the right kind of advice.
Yeah, 100%. Like distilling end users into a single representative identity is a misstep that is commonly made, and it's a misstep particularly at large organizations because you've got a mix of 20,000 people working at an organization, as an example, that range from technophobes to technologists, 18 to 65, working fully remote to fully on-site, ranging from frequent job hoppers that change where they work every couple of years, like myself, who may have been exposed to a pretty wide range of collaboration technologies through their travels, through to settlers who only know the way of your organization. They perform completely different functions, have completely different needs, and trying to sort of articulate those requirements from a single representation of that is always going to lead, I think, to missing some fringe and maybe even some core business needs because it doesn't fit into the representation that you've built for your users. So I'd tread cautiously on that for sure. So I agree with you there. You mentioned reporting and data collection, which is an interesting point. I mean, I guess how long's a piece of string on that? What data is actually useful to collect and can inform strategy versus is just data collection for the sake of data collection?
Yeah, I mean that's a key thing, right? It's conversion of the data into information. So the data collection is just the one thing, and being able to make that meaningful is kind of the science behind it. And that's where, kind of your big brains need to come in to actually create useful information from that data and how different pieces of data actually interact, and it's funny. I have one example of that situation where we were doing some data analysis of a client, and we found one particular space wasn't getting used on the floor. And we were like, why is that? Is the technology not working? Is not the right technology? What's happening in this space where people don't want to use it? And in the end, it was, there was too much sun because of a glass window, and people didn't like being in that room because it was too hot. It was actually a mechanical system item rather than a technology. So you definitely need to kind of dig deep in the data to understand what is actually going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it a step further, and executive attend and strategic senior leadership decision makers attend conferences where they get sold the dream, I guess, of this high functioning, high performing, totally seamless, integrated, hybrid enabled workspace, and get told about great new technologies that enable more immersive collaboration experiences, meeting experiences, and things like Teams signature rooms, for instance, with front row on a wide 21:9 display panel. Full disclaimer and apologies to anyone that's on this call that loves that experience. I am on the more negative side. Probably shouldn't be mentioning specific examples on this podcast too, but I'm just going to go with it. So they have exposure to these experiences at a high level and come back and sort of start asking the question of what it would take to deliver on that within the organization. But you've got to look at the benefit that would actually bring to end users versus the costs associated with it and the management complexity. Because, for instance, in a signature room, you now have to deal with having spare 21:9 screens on hand to replace if there's any damage, things of that nature. We had a look at how our meetings are actually typically run within the organization and found it was less than 30% of meetings that had any content shared within them at all. And when content was shared, it was typically in a 16:9 aspect ratio, which means on a 21:9 screen in your typical front row layout, you're going to have black bars on either side of the content and a lot of wasted screen, let alone when there isn't any content at all. Also, meetings were typically 4 or fewer people, with a slight uptick on meetings with above 30 people, like your large town halls and things of that nature. And then you've got to then make an assessment of, are those meeting types and those behaviors and patterns that the users are exhibiting, are they actually conducive to the type of system that you're discussing and attempting to bring in? If that system isn't necessarily going to support those meeting types as effectively, then does it have value in adding this to your, I guess, range of standards? Or do you deploy it only sporadically, maybe one every major location where perhaps there's a use case for a room like that to do more? It's like your old Cisco telepresence style rooms, like to do more rooms like that. That's the sort of, I guess, that's where data collection for me is useful in terms of informing, taking an informed approach to whether you press go or not on a new solution, not just sort of deploying it because it's the new cool thing that's being marketed fairly aggressively.
Yeah, whether that's Microsoft Signature Solutions or whatever it might be, being able to have that data to back up the use case. And, maybe the data says, absolutely, this is the exact solution that we need because our organization works like that. And on the other hand, it might be, as you point out, it doesn't support the use case and usage of our spaces.
Yeah, I mean, and don't get me wrong, if anyone from Microsoft is listening to this, I love your products. I'm not a hater, but you've got to look at, if you're running meetings with 6 to 8 people, there's almost always content. People are using the chat function, using the polls function. And it makes a lot of sense because the current Microsoft Teams room meeting experience doesn't sufficiently meet those needs unless you move to a front row layout. But if you're not doing that, whilst yes, you can modify the screen layout, that just adds so much operational management complexity to maintain that and make sure every firmware update you push doesn't break that link of the XML file which modifies the layout, that it's probably not worth it at scale. Not unless you have a contained single location office that a single person can rip around to every single meeting room and manually deploy updates if needed. And that's an area that we haven't touched on yet, I guess, is the operational side of it. But that's a major driver in terms of what solutions you actually end up with and deploy is they have to be manageable, scalable, understandable, supportable, and there's a hell of a lot that flows into that.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to transition into talking exactly about that. I mean, there has to be a baseline level of consistency and user experience, I think. Now, it doesn't have to be 100% of the system, but there needs to be some sort of a baseline percentage of every system kind of works the same, has the same look and feel. Then you can add, little bits and pieces depending maybe on specific user group scenarios, assuming that's possible, depending on what the platform and baseline is. What we hear, and you, of course, Pooch would be hearing it now and have been forever. People just want the technology to work. First time, every time. That's the expectation. Now more so than ever.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the phone, that's what the laptop gives us, and other bits of tech. So going into a meeting room should be exactly the same.
Yeah.
So then the challenge is, operationally, and from a design perspective, how do we make that an actual reality? There is a bit of a sort of a tug of war between coming up with standardization and flexibility for different functionality depending on what specific users and user groups want and need for the business. So that's always an interesting one. And it is highly dependent on the organization and maybe specific divisions of an organization. Support, though, is so critical. Whether you're small, medium, or large, you have to have some sort of support infrastructure in place, don't you? Which could be a combination of internal resourcing and external partners. But at the end of the day, a proactive plus reactive approach is needed to make sure that the room's working first time, every time. That's the ideal scenario we're all kind of working towards. Now, I think technology, and you can probably talk to this, because got a bit more exposure to this, especially in larger organizations. The technology, maybe AI, maybe other types of programs and software is definitely helping. I mean, what's your experience or thoughts on what's out there now and what's going to be possible in the near future to help support systems and make the user experience, in terms of it works first time, every time, a reality?
But it comes down again to how far towards the cutting edge or bleeding edge you want to be, knowing that the closer you get to that, the more you're risking in terms of that reliability and that works first time, every time. But, artificial intelligence deployments within a business context can be very meaningful and impactful in terms of just efficiency gains and productivity gains and improvements to collaboration. You've just got to balance that against, I guess taking a step back, even for me, first time works first time and every time means a couple different things. On one hand, it's the reliability of the system. But on the other hand, it's also the familiarity of the system to the end users that are in the room, in the sense that every room needs to have a consistent experience. It needs to look the same. It needs to feel like it's the same system. And if you've suddenly got a room where you've enabled AI-based speaker tracking functions or other similar functionality, and it suddenly starts behaving differently to other spaces, and you need to design differently, for instance, put frosting on glass so that it isn't recognizing people's faces that are standing outside the room, and you're doing this level of customization. You're moving away from that reliability ethos that generally drives is generally the number one sort of requirement of every business. You scale up. If you have a solid platform where the systems work, are functional, people know how to support them, there's good operational maturity, people know how to use them, there's good change and comms practices in place for announcing when there are any changes. For instance, now you can log in by scanning a QR code. And so people have that under control. If you have that bedrock, from there you can start experimenting with cutting edge functions. You can look at putting intelligent speakers in the room so that your intelligent meeting recaps will identify each individual user. You can look at coaching your user base through uploading their voice profile to enable that, and all the logistical hurdles that need to be met to actually deliver a good experience from that. But if you're leading from I want to deploy the AI experience as your first sort of thought in that process, then I think you're going to be at risk of fumbling that deployment and ending up with an imperfect situation with barely functional tech that doesn't necessarily deliver what it says on the tin.
Yeah, I think that change management and communication is so important now, as we've transitioned away from, the hardware change being the new features to software-driven feature change and kind of evergreen products where, month after month they're adding new features or changes, specifically how the system's used. Being able to communicate that to your user base is so important, because you're right. Just because last month they were able to achieve first time every time it was working, all of a sudden you have a software update, it slightly changes the way that the system works, and now all of a sudden you haven't changed anything in the room, but the systems are not working first time every time because the way that people are interacting with the systems is different. So that communication is super key.
It goes back to sort of what I was saying at the start, or what we were talking about at the start, about asking those questions to yourself about where your business actually lands on that line between being, I guess, cutting edge or risk averse. And that should inform every decision you make, right? Because if there's appetite to be innovative, if it's within the brand ethos to be at the front lines trying new things, sort of showcasing to your client base that, hey, we're a young, innovative, fast-moving company, and we're going to do whatever it takes to be as productive and efficient as we can be. There's a message that you can tie into that by saying, well, we're experimenting with these things to see if it delivers on that ethos. But depending on the answers to those questions, if you lie more towards the risk aversion side, then perhaps you need to be asking yourself, with that intelligent speaker AI-driven functionality, there's a mix of, it's a Microsoft-supported software solution that's running on third-party vendor hardware, typically mixed in with a different third-party vendor Teams Room solution. And that's just a lot of different points of failure and contact that need to work seamlessly together. And IT operative models commonly leverage a single master service level agreement with a blue chip vendor who take care of everything, right? Like, so if it's for the network, for example, that blue chip vendor will look after solution architecture, procurement, patching, configuration, monitoring, management, maintenance, break fix, the whole product lifecycle. And as the audiovisual space transitions more and more towards an IT operational model, there's this disconnect where they're learning that sort of the entire decision-making product group wants that single point of contact as well, because no one wants to be stuck in the quagmire, I guess, of a multi-vendor deployment where a firmware update breaks a link between the peripheral by vendor A and an MTR system by vendor B, and a video conferencing platform by vendor C, and no one sort of takes accountability for where the point of failure is. That's why companies like Cisco that own the end-to-end hardware and software package completely, there's a compelling argument to be made at an executive level for the utility of that, because there's that single point of contact and accountability. I've gone on a bit of a tangent, I'm sorry, but
no, you're very right there, because you're sort of talking about, and I just want to come back to the point you were making about the difference in the type of company, the culture, if you will. So there's maybe a more conservative business is most definitely going to go for that Cisco example you just gave. However, a different business that does want to be more cutting edge and find new ways to be more competitive, better at what they do, faster, maybe they'll take those risks, knowing that they're risks, knowing that their staff and people are on board with that because that's the culture, understanding that, hey, if it doesn't work first time every time, that's okay. We can still adapt, we can still be flexible, we can still move forward. We know that we're moving towards something that will be better, and we can be patient. And if you know that, straight off the bat, or at least as early as possible when you're working with a customer, or if you're on the inside and working with the people there and trying to put the AV solutions in place. I think that's a huge benefit to know that, and then use it as a baseline for making your decisions, isn't it? Because if you're going against what the culture is about, you're in trouble.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, it's something you said there about sort of identifying the risk and being aware of it. That foresight's important as well, because it's one thing to say, okay, where we want to be innovative and we want to take risks and we want to take chances with this, and try different things and see if they work better for our organization or unlock XYZ metric that you want to be able to unlock. But you need to have the foresight to then go, okay, that is going to pose certain operational challenges, and we need to make sure that we have the team or the expertise or the partners in place that can help support this transition, and we have the change management and comms policies in place to support our end users through the deployment of this new functionality. It's not just enough to go, okay, we're a cutting edge organization, so let's just throw things against the wall and see what sticks.
No, that's right. There does need to be a bit of a plan.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's maybe change direction and talk a little bit about end user experience without a focus on technology so much, because I know this is something that all three of us believe in very strongly. Jonathan and I, talk about it to death, but I'd love to get you to talk about it, Pujan, on why and what your experiences are. This is definitely, from your years there at Amicus, I think something that maybe came stronger and stronger in your belief system. And what I'm talking about is optimizing user experience through optimizing the built environment. So the spaces themselves, technology aside, can be optimized to improve the overall experience. There's things like the acoustics, lighting, furniture arrangements, etc. So what are some of your, I guess, priorities and focuses in that area?
Yeah, I mean, it's changing, isn't it? Gone are the days where, as an AV consultant or AV designer or client-side AV, you get given an architectural pack and a services pack and get told to mark up a few GPO locations and chuck your screen on the wall. Or at least I hope the days are gone for most people.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it should be gone, but you'd be surprised how much it's not gone. But anyway, let's continue.
I've got a particularly sheltered view of it, I guess, as my history of organizations I've worked at has been fairly unique. But I mean, it goes back to an ethos that exists even just in multimedia production or anything of shit in, shit out. And in this case, the shit in is the built environment. If it isn't conducive to speech clarity, if it isn't conducive to even neutral lighting so that the camera can actually pick up faces, and if you are using any AI-driven camera tracking functionality, that it can follow, sort of identify the sort of face triangulation and identify where people are actually seated and frame the camera accordingly. If the furniture isn't designed in such a way that everyone's got line of sight to the screen at the front, and also the camera has line of sight of every single person, then you're going to have a less than stellar experience in the room and at the far end. Acoustics are so critical now because, if you could put a condenser microphone in front of every single participant and have them speaking directly into it like a handheld, you would, and then you wouldn't have to worry about it so much. But that's a terrible solution, both from an end user perspective, like experience perspective, and a cost and supportability perspective. So you've got to leverage room microphones, and room microphones are designed to pick up the sound in the room. So if you've got a reverberant echoey environment, that is going to impact speech clarity for anyone sitting at home, and that's going to be a less than equitable meeting experience. So the tide's changing, right? Like it's changing in so many ways. Obviously, there's the whole IT and network side as well, where it's changing, which we're not going to touch on yet because that's a whole nother can of worms. But AV designers have got to work with the architects and the interior designers in terms of how the space is actually laid out, what sort of acoustic treatment or soft finishing you're putting in there, how that treatment is actually installed, how much of it. Even things like what the noise floor is in the room, how do you actually dictate that? Well, you've got to get down with the services engineers to go, where are you locating your VAV boxes for air conditioning systems? Where's the plumbing going to reduce the amount of background noise in the room?
Mm-hmm.
Are the windows sealed? Is there acoustic baffling above the false ceiling, or what's going on there?
Mm-hmm.
The role of the AV architect is changing to almost inform that early physical design direction from day one. And I think for an organization, what that means is you're going to need to come up with a set of standards, not just in terms of the hardware that goes into the room, but also a set of built environment standards for optimum AV performance that you can issue at a project level during the concept design phase, so that it gets taken into account from the initial design, because it's so hard to retrofit it after concept design is done and initial costings have been provided, to then go, actually, we need all these additional add-ons, and the budget you've asked for needs to the budget that we've asked for needs to increase by $200,000 or $100,000, whatever it may be. So the answer for me, again, is standardization, but it's a different type of standards that needs to be developed hand in hand with your internal property team or the architectural consultants, whatever sort of business model that your company has, to come up with that, and then make sure that it's enforced on every project moving forward. I think that makes a way bigger difference to the end user experience than the actual brand of microphone that you put in the room.
That's such an incredibly insightful point. I think people lose a bit of perspective when technology manufacturers are saying, my camera has got AI technology, it can automatically focus, it can automatically do all of these features. My microphone, you just need one microphone, it can automatically beamform onto all the different people's. But what's forgotten in a lot of the marketing materials is the engineers at those companies have created those products to operate in specific environments. And if your space is not delivering the right lighting, the right acoustic treatments, and the right layout of people, yes, you've got a smart camera, but it can't actually perform in that space. So that role, as you say, as the AV architect or designer or consultant, is to ensure that built environment is designed in a way to be able to support the technology and its automatic features. Because if that's forgotten, then those particular products don't work.
Yeah. And so challenge number one is building the buy-in to actually have a seat at the table to have those conversations. It's all well and good to have this knowledge, but if you can't connect at an architectural level with your built environment designers, with your interior designers, and bring them along on the journey, then this is, it's going to be dead in the water. And so I had a point. Now I'm trying to remember what it was.
I think, I might sort of say it this way. The actual technology itself has come along in leaps and bounds in recent years, and it keeps getting better month by month. Let's be honest. Yeah. And the promises you hear and read about from the manufacturers about the technology and the marketing is everywhere. Let's face it. They're extravagant promises, and they're not untrue. It's just that what you're saying, Jonathan, they have to be considered in specific environments. So it seems so easy. Oh, I can just go buy this product or this kit, this kit of parts. I'll just buy this kit of parts and I'll put that in my room and I'll be fine. That kit of parts is going to cost me, 15, 20 grand. I'll put it in my room, no matter what the room looks like, and I'll have great AV and box ticked. But that is so far from the truth. It's not funny, because the room itself relies on the tech and vice versa. It's like a two-way dialogue, if you will. They're interconnected. So if the room isn't right, the tech doesn't work properly. If the room is right, the tech works beautifully. So it's kind of like, unless you do both together, somewhere along the line you're going to be, left disappointed.
And it's the higher the performance expectations, the more that those two, the two-way street that you described, the more collaboration and connection there needs to be on that, which is hard in a way because traditionally that doesn't exist, right? That level of collaboration. And I'm not saying that's the case everywhere. In a lot of organizations, I'm very fortunate at the moment. We have a very, very collaborative and productive relationship with the property team. But traditionally, that hasn't always been the case. So you're basically expecting a paradigm shift in the way that people work together to deliver an end user outcome, which is what ultimately we're all trying to achieve in the project world.
Yep. Well, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. Team, this has been a really good conversation. We've talked about quite a few things. We've just been talking there about end user experience and how it's related to the physical space itself. Definitely a topic we've talked about on other editions of this podcast, and can't be, I suppose, stressed enough how important that is these days. The tech's gotten better, but so has the importance of focusing on the actual spaces themselves to get the rooms right for the optimal experience. And we've also talked about getting that needs assessment right, understanding the business itself, the organization, the competing needs of end users, executive teams, support teams, understanding the culture of the business, and why all that is so important to kind of understand the deepest level possible to then come up with the right solutions. And we've also then talked about coming up with, the bedrock, as you referred to, Pujan, a couple of times. It's like the foundation of a house. Just have some sort of consistent minimal level of user experience and design that can be supported and is consistent. And then you can build on that, for specific user groups or specific situations. But as long as you've got some sort of consistency there, it's definitely a lot easier to support. And communication, Jonathan, you also mentioned, was so key when we're talking about keeping everyone along for the journey. And every time a change happens, that change management and communication is so critical. We talked about lots of other things, but maybe those are the key takeaways for today. So, look, I'd like to thank you both. And Pujan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I think it's been really enlightening. Well, I think there's probably more to talk about, actually, so we'll have to have you on another time in the future.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Been a great discussion, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Tech Simple podcast. To like, share, or discover more episodes, head over to Spotify. If you'd like to talk to us about AV in your workplace or learning environment, book an initial discovery call with David or Jonathan at konnectus.com.au. And remember, Tech Simple!